What's going on, guys? Welcome back. Today we are going to be bringing you guys our best tutorial to date. We are going to be covering everything that you need to know when it comes to making a really cool pair of these Gucci custom cleats. So within today's video, we're going to really try and get back to the basics. We're going to really try and hit home on all these topics so you guys can really understand why you need to use certain products at certain times. And we really want to make sure that everybody knows what it takes to make a fully wearable custom cleat. So we're going to really try and cover all the topics there is to know, no matter what your level of experience is when it comes to customizing shoes. Maybe you've painted a couple pairs of shoes before, but you've never got to work on a pair of cleats, or maybe you've never even picked up a paintbrush or airbrush and put it to a pair of shoes. But we're going to try to cover everything there is to know, really get into the details, into the nitty gritty, into all that stuff that you guys are going to want to know. We got tons of tips and tricks coming at you. We got a long one for you guys today, so let's go ahead and dive right into it. So today's base model, we're going to be working with a pair of the Nike Vapor Untouchable Pros. This is definitely one of the most popular cleat models out over the last few years. And this is a shoe that I've had a ton of experience working on. I've customized literally hundreds of these. So I definitely know my way in and around these, and I'll be able to give you guys a lot of the tips and tricks that you guys are going to want to know when it comes to making sure that everything goes smooth when customizing a pair of these. So the absolute most important step, I literally can't stress this enough to you guys, is taking your time and making sure that you do your prep work correctly. So real quickly, I just want to cover a few of the supplies that you're going to be needing to make sure that you do your prep correctly. You definitely are going to want to be using a mask or a respirator because we are working with some pretty strong fumes when we're using the acetone. The acetone is one of the next supplies that you're going to be needing, and this is really used to remove that factory finish. And if you just tried painting a shoe without removing that factory finish, then it is for sure not going to be wearable. And no matter what the shoe is, there is some type of factory finish applied. Obviously when it is in the factory, whether it's a spray or a paint on something that they use, but we really have to get that off so that the paint has something to bite onto. I like to first use a Scotch-Brite pad or any type of scuff pad like that you can find at any hardware store. You can find these at the dollar store, but these are just gonna really be used to scuff up that surface. And this is something that we really need to do just so that we can have something for that paint to bite onto. I know we're gonna keep saying that over and over, but this is what it's really all about, guys. Taking your time to do this prep correctly, and believe me, it will be so worth it in the long run. So when it comes to sanding, I like to really use this Ryobi detail sander. This thing is my best friend when it comes to prepping cleats and any shoe for that matter. I like to sand almost anything that I'm going to be working on. And so the levels of sandpaper that I like to use are something starting around 400, so that's already a pretty fine sandpaper. We're going to then move up to an 800 and finish it off with something like a 1400 level grit. Now these are all very fine sandpapers. We're definitely not using anything coarse. And a lot of people have asked over the last few videos, because they've been seeing us use this sander kind of almost every time, where they could purchase the little pads that just already have an adhesive on the back that would go on this sander. But I just purchased the sandpaper sheets, cut them out to size, and then just use some masking tape, wrap that around, and just tape that onto the sander itself. So these are not pre-cut adhesive sheets. You can really only get those in really coarse grits. I think the finest that I've really seen is probably something like a 200 grit, and that's probably a little bit too strong for shoes. You would probably definitely be removing a little bit more than the factory finish and kind of get into the levels of damaging the materials that you're going to be working on. So, you know, although we are going to be doing a lot of sanding, we're not starting with a really coarse grit that's going to, you know, alter the surface too much or affect our material in a way that we're ruining it before we even start painting it. The other product that we're also going to use along with the acetone is some cotton balls, and this is going to be one of our final steps right before we're ready to paint. So this is going to be for any debris left behind from the Scotch-Brite pad or any of the sanding that we're going to do. So again, just real quickly covering all the steps that we do in prepping. We're going to first remove the factory finish by scuffing it up with the Scotch-Brite pads. We're going to then do some sanding with 3 different levels of sandpaper, and then after that we're going to use the cotton balls with the acetone, and that's going to pick up any of that debris that gets left behind from the Scotch-Brite pad. You'll notice there's some little green particles that get left behind, and then any of the debris left behind from the sanding. So this product that I used is the Scotch 2060 green masking tape, and it is by far one of the most trustworthy tapes I've ever worked with. I use this on probably 80 to 90% of the shoes that I do. No matter really the silhouette, I know that I'm going to have some nice tight lines as soon as I'm ready to peel back the tape when the product is just about done. So after we have this first layer of protection laid down, my little tip that I like to use after this is just lay down a paper towel to cover off the rest of the sole. Now there's a million different variations on what you could use besides a paper towel. Some people like to just put some wider masking tape there, or some people like to use garbage bags, pieces of paper, whatever it may be. But a paper towel gives me a ton of workability and bendability as far as working it around the different contours of a sole, and it kind of tends to already be cut to that perfect shape to really help you cover off a large portion of the sole. And the reason that you won't see me too often just cover off the rest of the sole with something like wider Scotch masking tape is because that'll tend to leave behind some of that adhesive, and then that's just another step at the end for you to have to remove that also off from the sole. So a paper towel, you're not going to get anything left behind, super easy to work with, and that's my go-to for covering off and masking off larger areas. So now that we have our sole taped off, the other thing that I'm also going to tape off is the swoosh, and these have a nice stroke around the entire swoosh, so it's super easy to tape off and then cut around with an X-Acto knife. There's already an indent there for you guys to really just pull your X-Acto knife around, super easy and quick, and this is just going to save you some time in the long run because now we have a nice white base for the swoosh later, no matter really what color you're going to be doing to it. So since we're going to be doing a Gucci print on this shoe, I know a lot of people who do these kind of designer prints and all over prints across shoes kind of just go all over with it, possibly cover up the swoosh in this case. But since the swoosh isn't really level with the rest of the shoe, it has this indentation all the way around. The print doesn't look that good if you're covering it across all these different surfaces, these different heights of the shoe. If you're working with a flat surface, it'd be a little bit different. But because of these indentations, these wouldn't look that good when you actually got them in hand. It just looks a lot better in my opinion if you go ahead and throw whatever company shoe you're working on. You always include their logo in the end. You don't really cover it up. You just find a way to incorporate that into your design also and really add to your design. So that's what we're going to be doing here later on in the video when we add a gold swoosh to these. We're going to use that to our advantage to bring in a little bit more color. And then the last step before we're ready to paint is we're going to lay down some adhesion promoter on our cleats. This is a step that you definitely do not want to skip, and you definitely want to make sure you have this product handy when you're going to be working on any cleats. It's just another thing that's going to go a really long way in making sure that your paint is grabbing onto whatever surface you're working on. And since I do a lot of airbrushing, I have this little tabletop airbrush booth. It's made by the brand Master Airbrush. It comes with this long hose that you could just stick right outside to a window, and it's just going to help make sure that your paint doesn't go everywhere when you're airbrushing, because you may not think it does, but these paint particles go all over the place and it'll get on your walls and everything. So this is just a great thing to have if you plan on airbrushing stuff in the future. Alright, so we're just about ready to go ahead and dive into the painting portion of this project, but we're real quickly going to just touch on some of the products that we're going to be using. We're going to need some Angelus red, green, flat black, light gray, sterling silver, duller, and tooth thin. So to make sure that our light gray paint is airbrush ready, we're going to mix it with some tooth thin, and then we're just going to strain that into another cup, and then any of the large paint particles or any clumped up type paint will be caught within the strainer, and then you will make sure that you're not putting any of that into your airbrush. You have some nice thinned out airbrush ready paint to go. Alright, now that we have our light gray airbrush paint ready, we're going to go ahead and use this as our base coats. And when it comes to airbrushing, you almost want to think about it as you're kind of misting the entire surface. You definitely don't want to go heavy with your coats. It's always better to go lighter, and light gray is by far the best base coat color because it's going to give you some great coverage, and we're going to be able to turn this whole cleat into a nice light gray in probably about 3 really light coats. Now this will vary from color to color, but like I said, light gray is a great base color, so we're going to be able to get this covered up super easily. After you're done with a coat, the most important thing that I can recommend to you guys is step away and give the cleat some time to dry. You really need to allow dry time in between coats. You don't want to spend too much time heat setting and then putting more paint on top of that, or even blow drying and putting more paint on that. The best thing that you could do is walk away, move on to a different project. I like to allow at least 15 minutes between coats, and that's also with me doing some blow drying in between. So now that we have our entire cleats base painted light gray, our next step is going to be turning all these synthetic surfaces on the cleat into a nice dark gray, because that's how we're going to get our stencil to peek through. So we're not going to be doing any of the dark gray on the mesh or any of the tabs on these, because we're not going to be putting the stencil on the mesh portion portions of this cleat. So before we get into spraying our dark gray, we want to mask off where we're going to be doing the Gucci stripes later in this project. So we're going to use some 2-inch wide Scotch masking tape and just lay a diagonal stripe of tape across the toes of both shoes, and that's where we're going to be placing the green, red, green stripes later. So to make that dark gray mixture, you're just going to go ahead and mix a couple drops of black into your light gray. So after you have your 2 coats of dark gray laid down, we are ready to move into the stencil portion of this video. So since we know everybody doesn't have their own personal tabletop stencil cutter, we went ahead and made an option on our Etsy shop for you guys to use this same Gucci stencil that we're going to be using in today's video if you guys want to go ahead and grab that. Okay, so what you're going to get with this stencil is enough of the G pattern to do on the outside of both shoes, along with a big Gucci and their symbol to do on the inside of the shoes. We will also have an option if you wanted to do that G pattern on the inside of your shoes also. So there's 2 different ways that you can use a vinyl stencil. You can either use the positive portion or the negative portion of the stencil. The positive portion of the stencil is what we're going to be using, where we lay down the G's themselves, cover up our dark gray, and spray around it. The negative portion of the stencil is if we were to use this part where we were spraying inside the G, hence within the negative space, negative portion of the stencil. So that's kind of how you guys can easily remember positive versus negative when talking about stencils. So since we're going to be using the positive portion of the stencil, we need to find a way to transfer this entire pattern onto our shoe. So we're going to be using some transfer tape to help us do that. So we lay the transfer paper across the entire pattern, and then we use something like a mini scraper or a coin, just something really hard so that we can really press and really get these to connect. After you've pressed really hard along your entire piece of transfer tape, you're going to go ahead, flip this over, and starting from one of the corners, peel back that backing, and you'll notice that you have all of your stencil now on your transfer tape. Make sure you take your time with this process and do it slowly, and make sure you peel diagonally. Now that we have our stencil transferred onto our transfer tape, we are now ready to put this onto our shoe. So we're going to be starting in the lower back corner of our shoe. The transfer tape is transparent enough that you'll still be able to see exactly where the pattern is and line things up exactly to your liking. Just kind of lightly hover the transfer tape stencil over the whole thing until you have everything lined up nicely, just where you want everything to be. So after you have this whole sheet lined up real nice, you think everything's looking good, we're going to start to remove this transfer tape in small little sections. So what I mean by that is take roughly a 2-inch by 2-inch area of your entire pattern, press down really hard on the transfer tape so that your stencil is now going to be transferred onto the shoe. And the transfer tape is super easy to peel up, rip exactly where you want it, and just real slowly peel that back. Make sure that your stencil is laying down. I like to keep an airbrush needle nearby, and that just helps press anything down that's also lifting up with the transfer tape. So this is just something that you need to take your time with. This is not a step where you just want to try to remove the transfer tape all in one peel. None of the stencil would get left behind. Make sure you take your time here. It's okay to move slowly just to make sure that that pattern is going to be perfectly symmetrical, even, nothing's going to be out of whack, and you're going to have things lined up really nicely. Okay, so after you have all of your transfer tape removed, the next step that's really going to help this vinyl lay down even flatter is you're going to heat set it. So that's just going to make the vinyl kind of grab onto your painted surface even a little bit better. This is really going to make sure that you get those nice, sharp, crisp lines when you're finally done with this and start peeling back some of these stencils. So as you can see in here from when I'm using the heat gun across this entire pattern, I'm really just flickering it on and off. And that's because you never want to keep this heat gun on for too long on any shoe because you could damage the material you're working on. And since we're using it on these tiny little pieces of vinyl, the vinyl can shrivel up when it's exposed to extreme heat like this, and then some of your pieces would start to be shriveled up. They might even come off, so you don't want to hold it down for too long. You're really just kind of lightly applying some heat and then pressing down with your finger over on top of that. So now that we have our stencil all laid down, it's all heat set onto our surface, we are ready to move into our final coat of silver on top of our dark gray. But since dark gray is obviously darker than silver, you can't just go and paint the silver right on top of that. So again, we're going to be using light gray as a base first for our silver to sit on top. So we're going to do 2 coats of light gray across this entire pattern. After we have our dark gray laid down, we're then ready for 2 coats of our silver. And here, when airbrushing on top of a stencil like this, it's really important that you allow that dry time in between coats, because you don't want to do too much blow drying or heat setting, because you could affect the stencil and you could blow pieces away if your blow dryer's on too high, or like we said earlier with the heat setting, you could cause pieces to shrivel up if you applied heat for too long. So this is when it's really best to just allow those 15 minutes or so of dry time in between coats. All Alright, now that we have this silver laid down, we are ready to go ahead and start peeling back some of this stencil. So you can use a pair of tweezers. I like to use an old airbrush needle. You're just going to really try to dig in right underneath that surface and peel it back, and you can see our dark gray is peeking through, our stencil laid down completely intact. Make sure that you didn't leave any pieces of vinyl behind. That's something that's kind of happened to us before. We're packaging up shoes, ready to put them in their shoe boxes, ready to go, and then we kind of see some portions of a stencil left behind, and you definitely don't want to be sending out shoes that have vinyl left behind on them. That can kind of happen a lot here because there is so many tiny little dots and all these G's, so just make sure you kind of rub your finger over the whole thing along with looking at it, and just make sure that no pieces are left behind. So after you have all of your stencil vinyl removed, you still want to go back, look over every single piece, and make sure that the vinyl laid down nice and evenly. We're not working with an even surface at all most of the time, so if any portions of your stencil didn't lay that flat, you'll see some overspray occurred or whatever it may be. You can just use a really tiny brush, or even like me, a toothpick, and touch up any of these tiny G's or these little circles everywhere. Alright, now that we have that knocked out, let's go ahead and move back into doing this Gucci stripe across both of the toes. So after we peel back this stripe that we taped off earlier, you can see that we already have some really nice straight lines to work with. So now we're going to use our green Scotch 2060 masking tape to just tape off these stripes. Since we have a nice light gray base laid down here already, and I know we're going to be doing our red stripe first, I still like to do a kind of in-between layer in between my light gray and my red. So what I'll do in this case is take a mixture of roughly 50% light gray along with 50% red and use that for a couple of coats on top of my light gray, and then I'm ready to spray my final red on top of this light grayish reddish mixture. We're then going to use a 5/8 inch wide vinyl stripe that will also come with your Gucci stencil to cover up our red, and then we're ready to spray our green on top of this. But same thing with the red, I like to use a light gray greenish mixture to really give an even better base for our green to sit on top of. In my opinion, doing these in between layers of color just really cuts down on your total coats in the long run. If you just tried spraying that straight green on top of this, it would just take you a few more coats than if you did these in between layers. So this saves you some time in the long run. Alright, and the final thing that we need to go back and paint is our swoosh. So after we peel back our masking tape from earlier, we already have a nice white base. So I'm going to be using a mixture of 18 karat gold along with a little bit of a mustard color mixed into that to just add a little bit more of a yellowish hue to our gold. So since we've already talked about this a little bit in this video, and of course if you watch any of our other videos, I talk about this all the time, but I'm going to be doing a couple in between layers before I'm ready to move right into our gold mixture. And again, the reason for that is because even though we have a white base, and if I tried painting gold directly onto this, I would bet that it would probably take 8 coats to get this totally solid, but if I do a couple in between layers, I'm probably going to be at about 4 coats total. So for these in between layers, I take whatever color I'm going to be working with in the end and mix that with a neutral color, whether that's white, light gray, or in this situation I'm going to be doing beige, specifically Angelus's Play in the Sand. So after we have a couple coats of this nice beige base laid down, we are obviously ready to move into our gold. A couple more coats of that, and now we have this goldish yellow, really solid, and it looks great, and it only took 4 coats total. So these little kind of steps that may seem unconventional will definitely go a long way because you're going to have these colors really solid in the long run, and your goldish yellow is going to be looking great at the end. Once all of our painting's done, it's time to move into our finishers. So this is actually a question that gets asked to us all the time: what finishers do we use? And I really can't stress this enough that actually taking your time to do the prep work is 1,000,000 times more important than whatever finisher you use. All of Angelus's paints naturally have a finisher built into them, so whatever finisher you do isn't going to save you in the long run. It's not just going to turn your shoes from unwearable to wearable, undurable to durable, just because you applied some finisher at the end. It's really all about the prep and the painting process, allowing that dry time. This is just that kind of final added layer of protection. It only equates for maybe 5 to 10% of how wearable these shoes actually are. All the other stuff before this is what's so much more important. So the finishers don't make or break your project. But of course, Angelus has some great options for whatever level of sheen you want. I like to use matte finisher, mix in a little bit of duller into that to just have an even more flat factory finish type look. And then after I do the Angelus matte finish, I also use a Krylon matte finish spray. Now that our finishing's all done, there is one final thing that we need to do. It's always a nice feeling because you know your project's completely done basically. It's time to select some laces. After you have your laces selected, you guys are officially wrapped on your pair of Gucci cleats. oh man, you guys should give yourself a pat on the back if you are still watching and made it this far into the video. This is a fun one, and I know I've probably been talking for a really long time. Thank you guys for sticking around this long, but I really wanted to get in depth and really get into the nitty-gritty of everything that you need to know for making a pair of Gucci cleats like this. We covered a ton of different things today, and hopefully you guys were able to take away at least a couple cues and some tips and tricks from us. Remember, of course, all the products that we use from today's video are going to be listed down in the links below. If you guys are interested in the Gucci stencil that we used in today's video, we also have that down below with the link to our Etsy shop, so go ahead and check that out. If you guys haven't already, please give this video a like. It really helps the page grow. It'll help this video get everywhere, and hopefully we're putting out some good information for all the other customizers out there to learn from. We'd really appreciate that from you guys. Make sure you're subscribed to the page if you haven't already, and we will see you guys in that next video.